Welcome to Beacons of Light. We've got another great episode where we're talking about all we've been through the COVID-19 pandemic. And with me today is Miss Debra Blacher, our shelter director. Welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you so much.
Doesn't it seem like forever since we've done a show because of the pandemic and all the things going on?
Nothing's the same.
It isn't.
Nothing is the same.
You know, in an earlier episode, we had Miss Denise that came on and visited about serving meals. And she went to go service of our daily meal. But that was different than when you're housing people. And so when the pandemic hit in March 2020, the world changed, didn't it?
It definitely did. And for us, it was really different because we were used to having people coming and going and doing different things. We were able to do different things. We had volunteers coming in. Everything ceased because of the fact that volunteers couldn't come in anymore. The ladies couldn't leave, and they couldn't come and go as they would on a normal basis. So we were at a point where we were cleaning constantly. We had an hourly regimen that we were doing. We'd clean the tables, the doorknobs, things like that, make sure everything was clean, because we wanted to be as germ-free as possible.
Right. And it was, wow. Because, when somebody's coming to get a to-go meal, that's one thing. But when you have a lot of people in one small place, Denise and I talked about God got us through the pandemic,
Oh, he got us through it also, because the entire time we were COVID-free as far as any of the guests contracting it. We had one, but they were actually in quarantine awaiting their test results. And once they received their test results, one of them was positive. But thank goodness we limited our interaction with them because of the fact that they were in quarantine. But we have a process in place,
right,
where if anybody tests positive, we have someone that we call, and they immediately take care of removing them and taking them to a place where they quarantine them. And this is through the state.
Right. And let me just say, Debra and her staff did a magnificent job. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary leadership. You did fantastic, because it's hard, in Baton Rouge, in this local community, St. Vincent de Paul runs 2 shelters for women, children, and families, and then 2 shelters for men.
Right.
And everything changed. You're right. I mean, when the pandemic hit, you had to go to the men's shelters, went to 24 hours. And then you have shelters for families that are always 24 hours.
Correct.
And, we encourage guests to be active in their lives. And all of a sudden, just like those of us who are not experiencing homelessness, that we have a place to call home, where we stopped everything and went into our own domicile, they couldn't do that. And we were asking them, you can't go and come as you please. And some of our guests at our facilities did real well with that. Others didn't do as well.
Right. Those who couldn't, manage to stay the 24-hour stay, they just left.
Right.
And, that was fine. We didn't have a problem with that, because of the fact that we knew that staying put wasn't for everybody.
Right.
Because of the various personalities, the people that we serve. Some of them can't sit still,
right,
for any long periods of time.
Right. People with mental illness, correct, and other disabilities.
Right. So, they left. And the thing is, if they needed anything from us, all they had to do was let us know, because if there was something we could provide them even though they weren't in the shelter anymore, they could still come back to us and get whatever it was that we had that we could give them. We had lots of people coming for the toiletry bags we give out because people were going to different places where there were fewer people, and they were getting their own, toiletries,
Right.
so that they wouldn't have to
Right.
use anybody else's.
Right.
So it
took courage to go
trying
to the
time.
door and open the door when everybody's saying, stay enclosed. And y'all did a magnificent job. I mean, we put each of our departments, whether it be shelter housing or food services, even though shelter and housing is right next to Miss Denise and food services,
Right.
but everybody was in a bubble, and that took a lot of getting used to too.
It did, because we were used to going
Oh,
as
yeah.
we pleased.
Right.
And we weren't able to do that either.
Right.
The shelter staff stayed in the shelter.
Right.
The dining room staff stayed in the
Right.
dining room. The pharmacy staff
Right.
stayed in the pharmacy. So things were different for all of us.
Right.
But one of the things that we did have to get used to was clients or participants coming to the door
Right.
without masks.
Right.
So, and now they know once they
Yeah.
hit that porch,
Yeah.
they have to have a mask.
Yeah, and we'll give them a mask, right?
We do. We have
Yeah.
masks available for those who don't have them. We'll just tell them, hold on a second, let me get you a mask. Or they'll walk up and say, I don't have a mask. Okay, let me get you one.
That's
So,
right. And so compliance with that has been just wonderful.
It really has.
Yeah, I hardly ever see anybody at the door anymore without a mask, which kind of, relieves some of the stress that our staff has, and just makes things a little bit easier. There are just so many dynamics in serving those who need that helping hand up. It's been an eye-opener.
And the other thing is, for people requiring intakes, when they couldn't come in, we had to do intakes over the phone.
Right.
And we have documents that have to be signed prior to putting them in the system.
Right.
So what we had to do is we had to get verbal authorization
Right.
in order to do that.
Right.
So there were quite a few things that changed during the pandemic.
And we learned a lot of lessons. And when we come back, we'll talk about those lessons learned. And behind every lesson was Christ. Christ was with us. When we didn't know what to do, we said even more prayers. And it always seemed like an answer would follow. And when we come back, we'll talk about how God talked to each of us in His own special way and got us through a very difficult time. For over 20 years, the St. Vincent de Paul Community Pharmacy has served our area. We provide prescription medicines for those who have nowhere to turn for this most basic healthcare need. Please, if you need your medicine or you know a family member that needs their medicine, contact us. Kay, how can they get in touch?
383-7450.
Give us a call today and spread the word so that we can ensure no one goes without their prescription medication. Welcome back. We talked about listening to God and Him answering our prayers. We certainly saw that. Sheltering individuals during a COVID-19 pandemic is an adventure. But when you take into account that hurricanes are on the way or bad freezes, the hurricanes were difficult. Let's talk a little bit about that. We just opened during the pandemic another day in disaster shelter. Thank God. Timing was perfect. So talk about that first tropical storm and then the hurricanes that came through and what y'all did to make a real difference.
Well, we had something in August, we had something in October, and those were hurricanes.
Right.
Then This year we had the freezes. But last year when we had the hurricanes, we had about 20 odd people come to the shelters, to the emergency shelter, I should say.
Yeah.
And what we did is the first event, the first hurricane, we had the most wonderful group of people. It was a joke because we were saying we don't know where they came from because they were so helpful.
Yeah.
We didn't have to worry about trying to, make people do anything. Everybody just volunteered. They kept everything clean because, again, we still had to
Right.
follow the protocol with
Right.
cleaning, every so often,
Right.
making sure everything was clean.
Right.
They took care of that,
Right.
taking the trash out,
Right.
everything.
Right.
So, God had a hand
Right.
in everything because had it not been for him,
Yeah.
we don't know how we would have made it.
Oh, no doubt.
Because there were so many different things thrown into the mix. But we did that in August and October. And then later, when the freeze came along, the first freeze, we had a large number of people there. We had about, 28, 29 people.
Right.
Then the second freeze in February, the last one, February,
Yes.
that lasted from February 12th through February 22nd,
Right.
we had,
You didn't have to look at notes for that. You remember
No, I
that.
remember those days.
Those days go down.
yes,
Yes.
but we had like 41 people there. And what we ended up doing is we ended up having to close our day program so that we could move some of those people to the day program. We put cots down there because of social distancing. We had run out of space in the emergency shelter. So we had to close the day program, put cots up there, and accommodate people there.
Yeah, and this is all going on. 41 people. That doesn't sound like a lot of people, but just one person out on the street in those freezing temperatures could have resulted in a very bad outcome. Their health, their own lives were at risk. But the other thing is, you got over 100 plus men, women, children in your other facilities.
Yes.
And so when you put all that on top of one another, it was difficult.
And the thing that I just thank God for is the fact that even though the people who were in the shelter, nobody had really had a COVID test.
Right.
So we didn't know
Right.
who
And by
had
law,
it
you
or
can't
who
require.
did not have it.
Yeah, you cannot require a COVID test.
Right.
And through the miracle of the Lord,
Nothing but God.
nothing but God, the staff came through okay. Everybody came through okay.
Yes.
And so from that vantage point, I think God really responded, and at a time when we were all scared to death.
Yes.
And
yes.
but we made it through, and we kept people from really some bad circumstances. Once the shelters closed, we tried to transition those people into beds that we might have had available, or other providers in the community. But in a lot of ways, St. Vincent de Paul is the last resort, right?
We definitely are. Because we have people who come to us from hospitals, from behavioral health hospitals, and those are kind of challenging for us, but we make it through it. And the thing is, when you put your faith in God, He gives you what you need.
Right.
And He definitely has been faithful to us because we're faithful to Him.
Yeah, and He's not like the bank. You never can get down to zero balance with God.
No.
Yeah, sometimes when times are rough, you're thinking, well, God helped me out last time. Will He do it this time? Well, yes. And all prayers are answered one way or another. Sometimes they're not maybe answered the way we like, but they're all answered. And I saw so many prayers answered. And the people that we're serving, some of them, they have health conditions that if they were exposed to the virus, what I've noticed is those who are at most risk have really taken the pandemic seriously.
Yes.
And they are always wearing their masks, they're always social distancing. And for them, having a safe place to call home while they're experiencing homelessness has been vital.
Yes, and the other thing is, once the vaccine became available, we had some of our participants sign up for the vaccine. So some of them have had both shots, and some of them have had the one, and they're waiting to have their second one.
Which is great, because they understand the seriousness
Right.
of, by law, we can't ask somebody if they've had a COVID test, and we can't require that they have a vaccine to stay in the facility. So it makes things challenging in that way. But God, when you got God, you have everything. When you don't have God, you got nothing. And I think sometimes in the world today, that's what you see, You see people of faith that have gotten through the pandemic, and they've dealt with some very difficult things, but they've survived.
Yes. And like I said, it's nothing but the grace of God that continues to watch over us, allow us to do what we do, and for the outcome to be as positive as it is.
Yeah, and again, we had a couple of staff members that came down with the virus in our shelter housing facilities, but to the best of my knowledge, our knowledge is that came from family, friends, people,
Right.
that they have close proximity to, but none of our guests.
No.
How that happens is miraculous.
Yes.
And
Yes, very much so.
and-
Because they don't really, like I said, they do go out because if they go, they have doctor's appointments, dental appointments, things like that. But they don't just go out just to be going. Now they'll go to the store. We'll take them, take a person to the store. One person will take a list for everybody, and we shop like that for them when they need something. But it's just been one of those things where God has had his hand on us, and he's just watched over us, and we've been able to make it through without any big incidents. So it's been wonderful.
Thank God. And God
Yes.
is watching over us. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about how God's watchful eye has gotten us through these difficult times. The Society of St. Vincent de Paul's first cookbook, Taste and See, is the gift which helps share the goodness of the Lord with those most in need. Featuring recipes from Chef John Foles, each chapter begins with a short story about one of our special work programs. To order your copy of Taste and See, please call the Society or visit our website. Help multiply blessings for the neediest in our community. Welcome back. We're talking about St. Vincent de Paul's response during this COVID-19 pandemic, all the things that we had to go through with our housing programs. And one of the things we had to do was, we have the strategy, Debra, of packing people in. Our desire is to get people off the streets. Well, that's not a good strategy during the pandemic. So we had to strategize, and we actually kind of closed intake right even before the governor's order, because we had, we have 4 congregant shelters, 2 for men, 2 for women and children and families. And so with those shelters, we kind of locked down because we felt relatively sure no one in those shelters had COVID-19. We were right.
Correct.
And so we also didn't want to be in a position to ask everybody to leave, or some to get down to the 50% where you could socially distance. So what we did was we locked everyone down. We said, if you're leaving the shelter, it has to be for a doctor's visit or to go for a job
Right.
or something like that. It couldn't be, I need to go down and hang out with my friends or my, whatever. You just can't allow that. So we took that strategy, and as people maybe found apartments or left on a good accord or just decided, well, I don't like being...
This isn't for me.
Yeah, and how many of us in our homes can say, we're tired of the lockdown? I mean, I'm tired of the lockdown. This is well over a year, and I'm still not back to normal. So, we had to balance all that.
Correct.
And we did it, didn't we?
We definitely did, because in the shelter, what we ended up doing is, normally we would have, in the women and children shelter, we have 4 in a room, because we have the 4 beds.
Mm-hmm.
And what we ended up doing is cutting it back to 2 per room.
Right.
And prior to the 2 per room, what we were doing is head to toe.
Right.
Head to toe. And that gave us more spacing between the ladies.
Right.
And also, in the day program, we ended up moving the tables further apart
Right.
and removing some of the chairs
Right.
so that we could socially distance.
Right.
But we had activities
Mm-hmm.
that the interns would have with the ladies.
Right.
And that kept everybody busy. But in the midst of an activity, when that hour hit,
Mm-hmm.
they had to stop
Right.
because it was time to clean.
Right.
But they really got a kick out of that. And they also had activities that
Right.
kept them busy.
Right.
So they weren't just sitting, and we had movies and things like that when they weren't doing other activities. So they managed to stay busy.
Right. And one thing that did help us is that the state of Louisiana, the Louisiana Balance of State, and the city, they opened up hotel rooms
Right.
and got some of those who are out on the street off the street.
Right.
And that helped us out a tremendous amount. And it really put us in a position to really do the best we could, because
Right.
some of those individuals, not a lot, but there are a few people that are still with us from when the pandemic hit.
Right. Actually, when the pandemic hit, we had a group there, and some of them, like you say, are still there.
Right.
However, some of them are saving money, or they've saved enough money to where they have been able to get out on their own, because we've had several.
Have done just that.
Yes.
And the reason why I mention that is usually, emergency shelter stay for a single person is usually 30 to 90 days. For a family, it's 90 days to 6 months, but just depends.
Right,
Every
it
case is
depends.
different. We have families that come in and only need a week or a month.
Couple of weeks, right.
Yeah, and then we have individuals that might come in that need more time or less time, just a day or two. It's just all over the place. But a lot of those that were with us for a year, which is very atypical, they were older.
Correct.
And so they had a lot of health issues. They really did not have a source of income. Maybe now they found jobs, but at the time it was very difficult, and being out on the street put their lives at risk. And, talking about lives at risk, we love our volunteers at St. Vincent de Paul.
I know, we definitely do, and we miss them so much, and they miss us too.
Yeah.
Because they've been calling, when can we come back? When can we come back? So we can't wait until we can say, you can come back now.
That day is coming. It's days away. But in the meantime, a lot of our volunteers, they prepare meals. And typically the volunteers will prepare a meal, or a lot of groups just buy a meal from a restaurant or a caterer and bring it in.
Correct.
Every night we have a group, and we had to freeze that completely for a couple of months when the pandemic hit.
Right.
But we had so many volunteers calling us and saying, hey, I got to bring a meal. Can I just drop it off? And we said, yeah. And so now every night we've got, most of the shelters are covered. They're bringing a prepared meal. No, they can't yet come in and serve, but that's going to change in the coming days. But they drop that meal off. Isn't that fantastic?
That is wonderful. And that's another blessing for us because they have just been so wonderful. Oh, they've been wonderful. And it's so funny because when they do drop the meal off, 95% of them
Yes.
always make the statement, I can't wait till we can come back in the shelter.
Now, you think of the world we live in today. A lot of times when people see homeless people, they look the other way or they walk on the other side of the street or whatever because they're scared. And these people of God are so understanding of Christ's call to seek and find the forgotten. They can't wait to get back in the homeless shelter.
They cannot wait.
And I see it. I mean, it's fabulous, you know.
Like I said, it's a blessing, and
It
they
is.
have been a blessing.
They have been.
Because they bring the meals.
Mm-hmm.
They also ask, is there anything else y'all need?
Right.
So if we have a need, all we have to do is tell them.
Right. Like
And they meet that need.
the masks. People came through, made masks. I even had a neighbor that handmade, a high school student at St. Joseph Academy, made masks for us. I mean, it just was an outpouring of support.
Yes.
It's just amazing, and you can see God acting
I was about
through.
to say, God puts people in your path, and you don't know why, but you eventually find out because they serve His purpose
Yes.
in doing what He wants them to do for you. So, like I said, we've been blessed with that because God put them in our lives to do His will towards us.
Well, you're amazing. All the wonderful volunteers that Debra just talked about, they're amazing. And our Lord is amazing above all. And it's putting our faith into our Lord Jesus Christ that really puts us in a position to succeed in life no matter what happens. A pandemic, whatever challenge may be, God is there with us to respond to that challenge and to make a difference. And we are so thankful at St. Vincent de Paul for God's help and His strength through these difficult times. We'll see you again next week on Beacons of Light.